Hello, this is Heath Jones, and welcome to the Northwood Podcast. Before we get into the meat of this episode, I should mention that if you like what you hear, please subscribe to this podcast by way of whatever platform you access it. Also, it would be wonderful if you'd leave a review, as this should help the algorithms direct this podcast to more people so that we can expand our outreach. And if you'd like to learn more about Northwood, please visit our website at indyncc.org. That's indyncc.org. Or you can find us by searching for us on Facebook. Simply type Northwood Christian Church into the search bar and we should pop right up. I should also give a shout out to allindianapodcastnetwork.com for hosting this podcast, as well as dozens of other Indiana-based podcasts, which you should check out. Today's episode is the first of a two-parter about what it may mean for us, each one of us, to be a healer, a life-giving presence, a nurturing presence to those around us, our friends, our family, and even strangers alike. And there are many stories in the Gospels where Jesus models the very sort of thing that I'm talking about, that I have in mind. And today I'd like to consider one such story as told in Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 34. But before we get into it, here are some ads. And we're back. As I was saying, we're going to be considering a story from the Gospel of Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 34, and it reads as follows. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came and, when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him. And a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately, aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." We will never know the full impact of our life on those around us. Domino effect, our actions have a reaction on those around us, cause and effect, and it's very complex. And there are even strangers that we speak to and then forget about those conversations, strangers that we speak to whose lives we have perhaps impacted by our words. I often try to face the question, in what ways does my life and example bring life and good things into the lives of the people I most care about? My children, my spouse, my friends. And more sobering, I guess, is the question, in what ways does my life and example harm them? In some cases, I know that by the words that I've chosen, I've spoken poison into the spirit of some of those around me. And the worst is when it happens whilst I'm unawares, ignorant, or simply not attending to the effect that I'm having on those around me. For instance, when I attacked my brother as a youth, using my words that belittled him, how has that changed him even to this present day? Now, we have a great relationship, but you just will never know. Or consider those words in passing between you and a stranger who you perceived to be a threat. I can remember saying of a peer that I thought was somewhat odd. I remember saying to somebody else that I thought she was weird, and then I turned around. I was about 12 years old at the time, so give me some slack, but I still remember to this day turning around and seeing the look on her face that she had overheard these words that I had not intended her to hear. And I did not want my words to hurt anyone, but I can remember the look on her face when she heard what I said. And she may have forgotten my words these decades later, but who knows? And that's exactly the point. Who knows? You'll never know the full impact of your life on the world, on the communities in which you live and participate. And then what about those times when we are more deliberate, when we treat those around us rudely and with impatience and on purpose? Perhaps we're having a bad day, or perhaps they did something to tick us off. What of the waiters that we dress down for getting our orders wrong? Or what of the persons on the helpline who bear the brunt of our frustrations with, say, our internet providers? What of the rude gesture born out of frustration whilst driving? So here is, I guess, the sobering point that I'm trying to make in a long roundabout fashion. All of these actions have impacts. However, we don't know the degree or the depth of the impacts our actions make on those around us. It's like we're stumbling through life as my children do when they plow through neatly folded laundry, unawares of the damage that they're leaving in their wake, the hard work that they are undoing in real time. Somehow, we must open our eyes to the ways in which we hurt those around us, perhaps peeling back layers of self-deception and cognitive dissonance. And then we must trust that God will give us a new heart, the heart of a healer, one who builds up rather than tears down. Jesus has the heart of a healer. Today's story opens with Jesus exiting a boat. Sometimes Jesus would board a boat to get away from the crowd, and in this case, the crowd followed him to the other side where he exited the boat and they pressed in around him. All this to say, he was being, at the very least, inconvenienced and at the worst, harassed. And the crowd was certainly imposing their presence upon him without him asking. And then there's this one man who has the gall to fall prostrate before Jesus, begging, pleading. And it's rude to be so forward. No one likes it. I know that I am torn between my ethical scruples and my own annoyance when I am confronted with a beggar. And this beggar was not asking for food, but was pleading for his daughter's life. We'll discuss next week how this beggar named Jairus was a man of means and higher social status. So how unlike the beggars who routinely interrupt my own life. Perhaps if a Jairus came to my door, then I'd be compelled by way of social obligation to act. Again, more on that in the next episode. Suffice it to say, Jesus does what we've come to expect of him. He engages, although he doesn't have to. He answers the man's request in the affirmative. He proves it by way of interrupting his schedule to visit the man at his home. Again, we'll pick up the story later, but for now, I'd just like to focus on what happens next. The woman who meets Jesus along the way. Unlike Jairus, she isn't given a name. She is like the nameless, inconvenient beggars that I am used to interacting with in my own personal life. And the more you learn about her, the less attractive she appears to be in light of social conventions of her day, the social conventions that she was used to answering to back when she was alive. One, she is a woman who isn't accompanied by a man and therefore is likely to be a ward of the community. Back then, it was expected that a woman would be attached to a patriarch in some household, whether her husband or her father. Cringe, I know, but that was the way it was. And as a woman, she couldn't own property, much less advocate publicly for herself. So this explains why she didn't address Jesus directly, but rather discreetly sought him out, because for her to address him directly would have been a scandal. Second reason she is not the sort of person that one would want to brush shoulders with in those days, by that day's standards. Again, I'm projecting back into the past. This is not how I feel, but this is how the people around her would have felt. One reason why she would have been somebody you wouldn't have wanted to consort with was because she has been bleeding continuously for years, rendering her perpetually part of the class that was then called unclean. Women on their periods were to be sent out of the city and weren't to be touched until they were proclaimed ceremonially clean. That is, if she were a Hebrew. If she were a Gentile, which we don't know if she was, how much worse for her. All this being said, what she knows is that there is no way that she can approach Jesus as Jairus has done, as this influential person had just done, begging for the life of his daughter. So she surreptitiously and secretly weaves through the crowd and touches Jesus' cloak. And it's the best she can do, a swing for the fences in the face of everything else. And hope against hope, she is healed. Jesus realizes this right away and turns to the crowd to discover who had been made well by way of the power that he had felt exit his body. Now, he did not heal her on purpose, be clear. This just sort of happened to him. He didn't seek her out, nor did he even know that she was nearby. So he asks, "Who touched my clothes? Who touched my clothes? Who touched me?" Now, to put a bookend on the narrative, the woman very abashedly makes her presence known. The text reads that she came to him in fear and trembling. She is worried that Jesus will conform to the social conventions of his day and rebuke her for stepping out of line, for advocating for herself, and for even appearing in public instead of recusing herself from society because of her perceived uncleanliness. Read unworthiness. For remember, her infirmity had made her unclean. For these reasons, she approaches a man who speaks with authority with fear and trembling. She is afraid for his rebuke, that he will rebuke an unclean woman. She is afraid that she's going to get chastised for touching a religious leader, someone with authority, in public, unwarranted, in front of everyone else, in front of Jairus, this man with clout in his own right. So, of course, she was afraid that Jesus might fly off the handle and publicly rebuke her, and no one would blame him. But we all know that this isn't what happened. After all, it's Jesus, right? Instead, he says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." He calls her daughter, a term of endearment, and then he sends her off with a blessing into her new life, which is a great story. But where am I going with this? Well, first, I just want to note something very obvious. Jesus possessed a healing power that had an immediate effect on the woman. He would discover who she was and in what way he impacted her. But you can ask the question, how if this healing man hadn't? How if he had never found out? How if she had never come forward? One could just as easily imagine the woman fading back into the crowd. And if she had, she'd have been lost to history. But one can't imagine it, and I wonder how many others were made whole by the healing presence and person of Jesus. It seems as though his life exuded life-giving energy, and this was certainly why people flocked to him from all over the land. How many others were affected by the life Jesus possessed? People will never know about. Well, I'd like to bring the question back around to us. Remember, I began this talk with some musings about how we'll never know the impact we have in real time on those around us. It's as if we're walking through life brushing shoulders with countless others, as Jesus was brushing shoulders with people in the crowd, unawares of the powers that flow through us, powers to harm, but powers to heal. That woman who needed healing most certainly brushed up against the hems of coats of persons who would have said to her the very opposite of what Jesus did when he named her daughter and told her to go in peace. I'll not even try and guess what slurs and derogatory words she had heard in her life, each in turn affecting her very spirit, her essence, and her sense of self-worth, and keeping her a million miles away from the healing and wholeness that she sought. This is likely what taught her to approach persons like Jesus in fear and trembling. So this is learned behavior, but who can blame her? And if Jesus had been anyone else, she may well have left that interchange more scarred and sicker than she had been before she reached out in desperation. And what's more, Those who had hurt her up until that moment in her life were probably wholly unaware of the impact they had on her because they were either ignorant of their impact on her life or, worse, they just didn't care. So now I'm wondering how many persons we are affecting without even knowing. No doubt, a careless word I have spoken has stuck with not a few individuals in the world, and I'll never know what damaging impact they had. Every day across the globe, there are billions of human interactions, some pushing others towards despair, isolation, anger, hatred, fear, self loathing. But other words are leading strangers, even, and loved ones alike, to living waters, healing, wholeness, life that is worth living, a greater sense of worth. How many persons have I pushed towards death, or how many have I led to life? And I will never know. And this is truly sobering to consider, which is why those who attempt to follow Jesus must be very careful. Followers of Jesus must commit to living in such a way that we reflexively and with hardly any deliberation lead those around us to life, because it's simply who we are. Because we bear God's DNA, God's imprint on our souls as we are made in God's image. In other words, we must be Christ-like, living like Jesus because God has given us a new heart. We must be as Jesus, walking through the crowd, unawares of the people brushing up against our lives, the whole while affecting those strangers in positive, life-giving ways. We must refrain from words or actions that drive the wedge between us and those others we interact with. We must repay rudeness or overt hostility with radical kindness. We must repay unfounded suspicion with the benefit of the doubt, dare I say, trust. We must be as Jesus was when he repaid his own executioners with these words from the cross: Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And who knows what healing and restorative power those words have brought into the human condition. Billions of lives changed by them and still counting. Who knows? You'll never know your impact for the good or for the bad, at least not in full, which is a lot to contemplate because lives are at stake. Keep this in mind as you move through life. Try to notice those nameless strangers moving through the crowds whose life might be impacted by your very presence. Jesus healed those around him because of who he was, seemingly without any intention or at times awareness. His followers must become like him and do the same. And the good news is, God is working even now to give us new hearts, hearts that beat like God's very own Son, Jesus Christ. As I keep harping on about, you'll never know your impact on others in this life, but who knows? Maybe on the other side we'll see it, and when we see it, we may hope to learn that we too were healers in our own time and in our own way. By God's grace, we too may join with Jesus in the movement to heal this world and all God's children in it. Let us all be healers and build others up. This has been the Northwood Podcast. My name is Heath Jones, as I said at the beginning. And if you'd like to learn more about Northwood, please visit our website at ndncc.org or look us up on Facebook by searching for Northwood Christian Church, or leave a review in whatever platform that you access your podcasts. Also, please check out the other podcasts made possible by allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Until next time, grace and peace be with you. Have a good week.